There's something very wrong with that restaurant. I've always enjoyed dining out, trying new places, and experiencing different cuisines. A few weeks ago, I decided to check out a new restaurant that had recently opened in town. I had heard some vague stories about it being a bit off, but curiosity got the better of me. What happened during that visit left me with an unsettling feeling that I can't quite shake off. The evening started normally enough. The restaurant was charming, with soft lighting and an elegant ambience. The hostess greeted me warmly and led me to a cozy table by the window. As I looked around, I noticed that the place was quite busy, filled with people chatting and enjoying their meals. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I perused the menu, which offered a variety of dishes that sounded delicious. The background music was soothing, and I felt relaxed as I sipped my water. The waiter approached my table with a friendly smile, introducing himself and taking my order. Everything seemed perfect, almost to perfect. It was the kind of place where you could easily lose track of time, caught up in the pleasant atmosphere. About 20 minutes later, the waiter returned with my meal. I thanked him and began to eat, savoring the flavors. As I enjoyed my dinner, I couldn't help but notice something peculiar about the other diners. They were all engaged in their own conversations, but there was a strange synchronicity to their movements. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unnerving once I noticed it. For instance, several people would lift their forks to their mouths simultaneously, or take a sip of their drinks at the exact same moment. I brushed it off as a coincidence at first, trying to focus on my food. But the more I watched, the more I realized it wasn't just a one-time occurrence. The synchronization continued, creating a bizarre, almost choreographed feeling to the dining experience. I started to feel a bit uneasy, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. The real strangeness began when the waiter returned to check on me. I smiled as he approached, ready to tell him that everything was fine. But as he stood beside my table, I felt an inexplicable chill. His expression was still friendly, but there was something in his eyes that made me uneasy. It was as if he was looking right through me, not at me. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked in a perfectly pleasant tone. "Yes, everything is great," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I felt a growing sense of discomfort. He nodded and walked away, and I tried to shake off the feeling. I continued eating, but my appetite was fading. I kept glancing around the room, feeling increasingly out of place. The synchronized movements of the other diners were becoming more pronounced, almost mechanical. I wondered if anyone else noticed it, but everyone seemed oblivious, caught up in their own worlds. As I finished my meal, I decided to skip dessert and ask for the check. The waiter returned promptly, and as he handed me the bill, his fingers brushed against mine. His touch was ice cold, sending a shiver down my spine. I looked up at him, and for a split second, his smile faltered. His eyes seemed empty, devoid of any warmth or genuine emotion. I quickly paid and left the restaurant, my mind racing with confusion and unease. As I walked to my car, I glanced back at the restaurant. Through the window, I saw the diners continuing their synchronized movements like puppets on strings. The waiter was standing by the door, watching me leave, his smile fixed and unnatural. When I got home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I locked all my doors and windows, double-checking them before going to bed. That night, I had trouble sleeping, my mind replaying the strange events over and over. I kept seeing the waiter's empty eyes and the eerie synchronization of the diners. In the days that followed, I did some research on the restaurant. I found a few reviews mentioning the odd behavior of the staff and patrons, but nothing concrete. Most people seemed to enjoy their experiences, but a handful of reviews hinted at something unsettling beneath the surface. I haven't been back to that restaurant since, and I doubt I ever will. The experience left me with more questions than answers. Was it all in my head? Or is there something truly strange going on in that place? Whatever the case, it remains one of the most unnerving experiences of my life, and I can't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Update 1. After sharing my initial experience, I received an outpouring of comments and messages from people who were equally intrigued and disturbed. Some shared similar stories, while others offered explanations ranging from psychological phenomena to urban legends. Encouraged by the support, I decided to investigate further, hoping to find some rational explanation for what happened. A few days after my post, I decided to walk by the restaurant during the day. It looked ordinary enough, with a few people inside enjoying their meals. The unsettling synchronicity I had witnessed was absent. I felt a bit silly, thinking maybe my mind had played tricks on me. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to go back for another meal. I convinced a friend, Mark, to join me for dinner the following Friday. I didn't tell him about my previous experience, wanting his impressions to be unbiased. We arrived at the restaurant around 7 p.m., the place bustling with patrons. We were seated at a different table this time, but the ambience was the same, elegant and inviting. As we waited for our food, I observed the other diners. At first, everything seemed normal. People were engaged in conversations, laughing, and enjoying their meals. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice the same unsettling synchronicity I had witnessed before. It started subtly, with small groups of diners lifting their glasses or forks at the same time. I nudged Mark and whispered, "Do you notice anything strange about the people here?" He glanced around, frowning. "What do you mean, just ... Watch them for a minute," I suggested. Mark shrugged and observed the room. After a few minutes, his expression changed from casual curiosity to concern. "Okay, that's weird," he admitted. "They're all moving in sync. How did I not notice that?" Our food arrived, brought by the same waiter from my previous visit. He smiled at us, but this time I couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment too long, and the chill returned. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" he asked, his tone perfectly polite. "Yes, thank you," Mark replied, but I remained silent, staring at the waiter's cold eyes. He nodded and walked away, and I noticed that his movements were almost robotic, perfectly timed with the other staff members. I told Mark about my last visit and how unsettling it had been. He listened intently, his face growing more serious with each detail. "We need to figure out what's going on," Mark said. "This isn't normal." As we ate, we tried to discreetly record the diners with our phones, capturing their synchronized movements. The more we watched, the more unnerving it became. At one point, I saw a man drop his fork. Several other diners paused, almost as if they were waiting for him to pick it up before resuming their meals in unison. It was as if they were all connected by an invisible thread. After we finished our meal, we decided to stick around for dessert, hoping to gather more evidence. The waiter brought our desserts, and this time, when he handed me the plate, his fingers brushed mine again. The same icy touch sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up at him, and for a split second, his smile seemed to twist into something more sinister. Then, just as quickly, it returned to normal, leaving me questioning what I had seen. As we prepared to leave, I noticed a woman sitting alone at a nearby table, staring directly at me. She hadn't been there when we arrived, and something about her gaze was unsettling. Her eyes were wide and blinking, and she seemed to be mouthing something silently. I nudged Mark, who saw her too. "We should go," he whispered, clearly unnerved. We quickly paid and left the restaurant, my heart pounding. As we walked to the car, I glanced back and saw the woman standing by the window, still staring at us. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes seemed to follow us as we drove away. Back at my place, we reviewed the footage we had taken. It was clear dozens of diners moving in perfect sync, almost as if they were part of a choreographed performance. We also caught a brief shot of the woman who had stared at us, her expression blank and eerie. Determined to understand what was happening, I posted the footage on a private forum for paranormal investigations. The responses ranged from theories about mass hypnosis to more sinister suggestions of mind control. Some suggested the restaurant might be a front for some kind of experiment. Since that night, I've felt like I'm being watched. At home, I catch glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye, but when I turn, there's nothing there. Mark has experienced similar feelings, and we've both had trouble sleeping. The sense of being observed is relentless, and it's affecting our daily lives. I don't know what's going on at that restaurant, but I'm more convinced than ever that something is very wrong. We're considering involving professional investigators or even the authorities, but we're not sure how to explain it without sounding crazy. Thank you to everyone who has offered support and advice. If anyone has experienced something similar or has any idea what might be happening, please share. We're desperate for answers and increasingly fearful of what we might uncover. Update 2. It's been a whirlwind of events since my last update, and I wish I could say we've found a logical explanation for what we've experienced. Unfortunately, the situation has taken a turn for the more bizarre and unsettling. This will be my final update, as things have escalated to a point where I feel compelled to step back and protect my family and myself. After our unsettling second visit to the restaurant, Mark and I decided to go back one last time. We felt driven to understand what was happening despite the risks. We planned our visit carefully, agreeing to stay alert and leave at the first sign of anything unusual. We arrived on a quiet Wednesday evening. The restaurant was less crowded, but the same eerie ambience persisted. We were seated in a different area this time, near the back where we could observe the entire dining room. The waiter who had served us before was there again, moving through the room with his unsettling, robotic grace. As we ate, the synchronized movements of the other diners became more pronounced. It was as if the entire room was performing a silent dance, each movement meticulously timed. Mark and I exchanged uneasy glances but continued eating, trying to act normal. Halfway through our meal, I noticed something even stranger. Reflected in the large mirror on the opposite wall, I saw not just our table but also another version of it slightly out of sync with our movements. It was as if we were watching a delayed reflection, a few seconds behind reality. I nudged Mark and pointed it out. His face paled as he noticed the discrepancy. "Let's finish quickly and get out of here," he whispered. We signaled for the check, and as the waiter approached, I couldn't help but feel that same icy chill from his touch. His eyes seemed darker, more hollow than before. He handed us the bill without a word, his smile fixed and unnatural. As we prepared to leave, I caught sight of the woman who had stared at us during our last visit. She was sitting alone again, her eyes locked onto me with that same unnerving intensity. But this time, there was something different about her. Her expression was almost ... pleading ... We hurried out of the restaurant, my heart pounding. Once outside, we took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. Mark suggested we take a different route home just in case. Later that night, I reviewed the footage we had taken with our phones. It was hard to see anything unusual at first, but then I noticed the same slight delay in the reflections. It wasn't just the mirror in the restaurant. Even the glass windows seemed to show a reality a few seconds behind. It was as if we had been in a place where time didn't flow normally. The following days were even more disturbing. Both Mark and I started experiencing vivid nightmares, often involving the restaurant and the hollow-eyed waiter. I woke up several times in the middle of the night, convinced that someone was standing in the corner of my room, watching me. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. At home, I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned, nothing was there. My daughter started drawing pictures again, this time of shadowy figures standing outside our house. One evening, as I was locking up the house, I glanced out the window and saw the woman from the restaurant standing across the street. She was motionless, her eyes fixed on my house. I blinked, and she was gone. I questioned my sanity, but the fear was too real to ignore. Mark called me the next day, his voice trembling. He had seen the same woman outside his apartment. We both agreed that we needed to stop investigating and focus on protecting ourselves and our families. Since then, I've tried to put the experience behind me. I haven't been back to the restaurant, and I avoid that part of town altogether. The nightmares have lessened, but the feeling of being watched lingers, a constant reminder of the strange and unnerving events we witnessed. I don't know what we encountered at that restaurant, but it felt like a glimpse into something beyond our understanding. Something that shouldn't exist in our reality. I can only hope that by stepping away, we've left it behind for good. Thank you to everyone who supported and believed in our story. I urge you all to be cautious and trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Some mysteries are better left unsolved.